All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another stream where I'm looking at some teams post trade deadline. Gonna get into what could come next for some of these teams. Look at what what they've done, what they've accomplished over the year, and just kind of see what's next. Oh, you know what? I am sorry. I got an echo going on. Sorry about that. And yeah, so I did the Pelicans last week. Now we're going to do the Hornets this week. And here to join me is James Plowright, one of the best Hornets, journalists out there that I know covering them. And I just couldn't think of anyone better to talk to. James, thanks for being on. And how are you doing?
Yossi, very, very kind words. When you say one of the best, you mean one of the only, but that means the same thing, so I'm happy with it.
Yeah, no, but I'm glad to have you on. We've been in touch for a little bit, and and I'm excited to get into this. Now, admittedly, haven't watched. I can't say I've watched enough Hornets this season. It's funny because I remember when the Mark Williams trade happened. There was a lot. There's comedian Amir from Jake and Amir. He said, "Too many Mark Williams takes. I don't think enough people watch the Hornets to have these takes." So, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a Hornets expert or anything. I definitely could watch more of them. So that's why I got you on. And I just want to start in just some general thoughts on their season. Because, the biggest thing is their development. We know what the goals are. They're not really trying to win this year. But as far as, I'll ask you this, who would you identify as for sure the core players going forward? And how do you feel about what you've seen so far from them this season?
Core players going forward. Look, before I'll be really honest. Before the Mark Williams report trade, he would have been in that group of core. He was one of the guys who the coaching staff and the front office referred to as being part of the core. There was a phrase going around the Hornets of Core Four, which was Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, and Mark Williams. Now, I never viewed it as that. I kind of viewed it as really a core three. I thought Miles Bridges was a different criteria, kind of an asset that they kept as a kind of temporary placeholder, while T. Salon developed, and actually early in the season when Grant Williams was healthy, he was more impactful and effective than Miles Bridges this season. But right now, I really don't think there is many players you would say are kind of off the table, and I would definitely say would be here in 5 years. I would probably say Brandon Miller and maybe T. Salon by default because you drafted the youngest player in the NBA, and you've probably got to have a long runway once you make that selection and you sign yourself up to that. So I think this new ownership group, remember, new front office, are kind of keeping a pretty open mind and a pretty blank canvas. And the Mark Williams trade didn't go through, but it shows what they're capable of, right? And they are willing to be bold and to make moves that maybe traditional rebuilding teams wouldn't always make, in terms of where normally it's any young player who shows anything, you keep them and you hope they develop. I think the Hornets could be looking at this in a pretty cutthroat fashion.
Yeah, as soon as they traded Mark Williams, I just kind of felt like there's not too many people, and it's hard to even identify who they're really attached to at this point. It's a new front office, and they didn't draft any of these players other than Salon. And as far as last year, I think they did a pretty excellent job with their rebuild, trading their veterans and getting the draft equity they got. But then as far as, now I'm seeing the Nick Richards trade, I could understand that. The Mark Williams trade was a little surprising, and we could get into that a little bit more. But let me just fix my gain. And so I guess I'm trying to think where I want to start. But since we're already on Mark Williams, we might as well touch on that, because that's something that you've been covering a lot. And I'm not hearing too much from a Hornets perspective. A lot of it is just I've seen more of the Lakers perspective on this thing. And they So like I said, they're not really attached to anyone. They trade Mark Williams, which surprised me. But and I've got some ideas about what went through the Lakers' perspective, but overall, like, what is your like entire feeling about not necessarily what you think happened, but what do you think about just I'll give you the floor. What about what happened there?
Mm. Look, their vision for Mark Williams coming into the season and when they drafted Mark Williams was that he was going to be a defensive difference maker, right? I think he led his college league in blocks. You know, he had the longest standing reach in NBA history. And what you saw in the first half of this year and all the way through his career really is actually he's been a better productive offensive player than defensive center. And when you have players like LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, who are kind of, you wouldn't describe defense being the first things when you talk about those guys, and Miles Bridges too, you start going, well, like, you need to surround those young core players with good defenders. And Mark Williams was struggling in that factor. So I think that's definitely part of it. I think they maybe look at it and going, we need to find a defensive back line behind LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller that isn't Mark Williams, and I don't know if we believe that he will be that. I think also with that, there is the concern about he is up for an extension in the next 12 months, basically, and he's not played that many games. You're going to have to pay him potentially a lot of money, and he's really struggled to stay on the court. He tore his thumb ligaments during his rookie year. He then had the back injury last year, and then this year he had a foot sprain in September, which we thought was going to be week to week, ended up being out months, and he's still missing games now with this left foot injury management. It's hard to know if that is tanking for the Hornets or if that is legitimate concern about the injury because of the state of where the team is. But I think it's a kind of concoction, really, of reasons around they probably wasn't fulfilling the defensive potential they saw. They have concern about the injuries, and they're about to have to make a decision on whether they pay him a lot of money. And I don't think they were shopping Mark Williams. I think they saw the Lakers as an opportunity to get Dalton Connect, who they liked highly in the draft, and to get a first-round pick and a swap, which, if you speak to the Charlotte Hornets, in their eyes, they probably would have a good chance to be better than the Lakers in 2030, whenever that swap was. So I don't think they were by any means like desperate to get rid of Mark Williams. I think this was a rare situation where they just felt the deal on the table was one they could not pass up. And they had some, reservations they were obviously concerned about. But now they have kind of shown their hand that they are concerned about those things, and they're now stuck with a Mark Williams whose trade value must have taken a hit, and they're still facing all those same concerns that they obviously are worried about, or they wouldn't have made the trade in the first place. So we are in a pretty unprecedented situation right now with a young player with a big contract incoming, and like, he's been productive when he's played. But, he's had some really standout games the last 2 seasons that really pop out the box score, and he's had halves where he looks like one of the best centers in the league. It's not consistent, but there have been momentary flashes, and that's even with missing so much extended time to injury.
So you answered what my next question was going to be, which is that it sounds like you like the return. I love what that return was. I was pretty blown away that the Hornets were able to get all that for Mark Williams. And it just feels like, he missed basically a whole calendar year. He comes back, has the best 10, 15, 20 game stretch of his career. And the Lakers, obviously in a bit of a desperate situation, sort of, having no big man, they did this trade and gave up. I feel like that 31 pick alone is already a lot more. Yeah. Like, I think I highly value far out picks. I wouldn't have given even like, I don't feel too good giving up that alone for Mark Williams on top of the swap and Dalton Connect. So that was just a great trade. I think you just don't pass up on that deal if you're the Hornets. But at the same time, I don't think we've ever seen like this type of reaction / backlash to a rescinded trade quite like this. Just a lot of different perspectives on one, whether he really was injured enough or whatever it is to get rescinded. There seems to be a lot of people. He got his representation saying otherwise. The Hornets don't agree. And that's number one. And then the other thing is just like the process now. I do wonder if now there's going to have to be some more clarification on the process of rescinding trades. And this is something I alluded to a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about the rescindment, where I'm not saying the Lakers did this trade in bad faith, but I do think there needs, and again, this isn't a thing that happens often. You don't see teams just like rescinding trades for no reason. But if he really doesn't have any like serious long-term injury concerns that warranted getting his physical failed, that's a real problem, because that can really hurt his value. That could hurt his earnings long run. Like just this physical being failed alone could do a lot of damage for what his next extension is, or what is his future earnings. Hopefully that's not the case, but this is the kind of stuff. It's a pretty serious. In this case, it's kind of serious. So, if I'm not saying the Lakers just did the trade to bring him into the door and do a physical, and then just to see how he really is, but I do think there needs to be some type of tightening up of that sort of process, just in the future, where because now there's just so much gray area in terms of what the Lakers are saying, what Mark Williams, his representation, is saying. And I would feel pretty frustrated as a Hornets fan, understandably so.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the situations where you feel really bad for Mark Williams, because his name and reputation and, like you say, future earning potential has been dragged through the mud. Like this is going to follow him his whole career from now on. And like every doctor is going to be getting second, third opinions on when they get these medicals, because they're going, what are we not seeing that the Lakers saw, right? So that's really a concern. And I mean, Adam Silver, even he was asked about it at All-Star Weekend, and he kind of asked himself the open questions, and I quote, saying, "Is there a different standard of sort we should be applying in terms of players passing medicals? It's something we should look at." If this was not controversial and the league didn't believe that the Lakers were, pulling a little bit of funny business, or at least have exposed a kind of loophole in the CBA of where you can kind of have a chance for a mulligan for a trade 48 hours later, like, he wouldn't be saying that kind of thing. And you've not seen many quotes coming out backing up the Lakers side here, right? It's been everything angling that the Lakers are the ones who essentially are kind of like chosen to see something in those medicals. And maybe they have, and maybe it is legitimate, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's something that the majority of teams would fail in the NBA. But when you get into subjective medical opinion, it's very difficult to prove in any appeal or case, and that's probably why the Hornets haven't lodged an official dispute, because it's going to be one expert doctor's opinion against a different one. And the NBA is not going to rule one doctor is clever than another doctor. It's just not going to happen. But like you say, Charlotte are now in this situation where, what do they do with Mark Williams? Do they shut him down? Do they try and trade him again in the summer? Do they play him to prove that he's healthy now to try and get him play in the summer? Or do they somehow move on, let bygones be bygones, and reunite, and Mark Williams is the starting center next to LaMelo Ball moving forward? Like, he's also a great fit next to LaMelo Ball, like he was with Luka Doncic, which is why the Lakers wanted him in the first place. And he's not been able to play with LaMelo until this year because of injuries of both players. It's been very limited time they've been able to play together. So it's a really difficult situation for everyone involved. You do feel for Charlotte in this situation. And I think there's enough concern around the league that I think the Hornets are right to feel a little bit hard done by. And if there had been ways to amend the trade, either post deadline, which I know, the other teams in the league in the Western Conference aren't going to be happy for the Lakers to amend a trade post deadline, that's for sure. But if that had been possible, I'd be curious to know if that would have happened, or if the Lakers were just like, no, we're out entirely.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to reverse it at this point. It's just too much
of
a precedent to just do this at this point.
I wonder, like, part of me even wonders, right? Get to the summer. I imagine relations between the front offices aren't great, but Lakers are still going to need a center in the summer.
Yep.
The Hornets are still going to have this problem on their hand. Is there a world where the two teams can overcome the past issues and re-agree on a new deal? You know, the Hornets obviously like Dalton Connect. You can water down some of the pick protections. It's interesting. I don't know. That could be a way out for both teams in the summer. It won't be as good a return for the Charlotte Hornets, but they could still get potentially a good return.
So yeah, that was what I was gonna allude to next. I think they'll revisit talks. Clearly the Lakers did have an interest in Mark Williams. Maybe if they were able to amend the terms when it was before the trade deadline, maybe that's all it would have been. Maybe they just wanted to change it a little bit, give up a little less. Look, we don't need to get into conspiracy theories if they got cold feet but at this now, the Lakers will also have a little bit more options now. So yeah, I think they'll be revisited, but it'll probably be I would imagine the Lakers are gonna try to give up significantly less than what they did. So we'll see how that happens. I'm more optimistic though. I don't think I tend to agree with whoever is saying that Mark's long-term health isn't that, or he doesn't have any issues with his body that should affect him long-term. I'm more optimistic that that's not really the case. And as far as an extension, I haven't really thought about too much about what that could look like. I think we need to give it a little more time to see how he finishes the year, because now, his body sort of is in question right now, just given this whole fiasco. But if he
I would say there is a 0% chance of an extension between the Charlotte Hornets and Mark Williams right now. Because even without this trade, I would have said that was likely to be the case anyway. Just because you don't pay injury-prone 7'1" players 12 months in advance. It's just dancing with the devil, and even more so now. I just think it would have to be some miraculous turnaround. We've had foot issues, we've had back issues. For me, you want as much information before you make any sizable commitment on a 3 to 4 year contract, and you only get that by taking it deeper into the next year and not giving out the extension. And he's also just not quite played consistently enough to, I think, earn an extension yet. I don't think you know what you're getting. He's in his third season, but really, in the terms of NBA world, he's basically only just past playing most games as a rookie. Like I think he's played 100 games in the NBA yet. So I would say that chance is absolutely dead.
Yeah, I think even without this rescindment, what you just said is a fair statement. Like, he missed the whole calendar year. So I think there's even without like this physical, I think there's still just justification from the Hornets or whichever team he's on. Why don't we play out the year? Now, obviously, if he went to the Lakers, if that trade went through, I would imagine he was going to get a nice extension, because considering what the Lakers gave up to get him, that would have played in his favor. Now, we'll see. We'll see where he ends up. I'm inclined to feel like he's probably going to get traded no matter what at this point. I think it seems like the Hornets would like to move on for all, multiple different reasons, and, get what they can and continue this rebuild they're on. And I'll give them a lot of credit where they have a new ownership, new front office, and they haven't made the play-in tournament since, I think, 2021 or 2022. And they've been in the lottery 3-4 years now, and they're going to continue this, which it takes a lot of patience and a lot of strong will to be willing to do this again, reset the timeline once more. And they're very much in the beginning of this, so I commend them for doing this, because I didn't really see a consistent playoff team with what they were having up until last year. I just didn't see it. But let's get into the other trade they made. essentially you can almost call it like one big trade with the Suns. They did two. First, they did the Nick Richards trade, got a net of 2 second-round picks for him. And then they took on Yusuf Nurkic and a 2026 Suns first-round pick. Now, when I first saw this trade, there was like a flurry of other trades happening, and I'm streaming and I'm like posting on Twitter, and I just my brain read this as the 2025 pick, which is like the lesser of the Wolves or Cavs or whichever they got from Utah in that trade they did with them. And I think it was only like a couple days later, like I actually read it correctly. I'm like, oh, a 2026 pick. So this one,
good luck figuring out which team that might be.
Yes. So that's a caveat. If it's not necessarily a Suns pick. So if you're thinking, you hear this, a 26 Suns pick, that might be pretty good. So there's a lot of swaps involved.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to.
It's the most complicated pick I've seen linked to the Hornets ever. Like, it's basically, the way I kind of say it is like, it's whichever the worst pick will be, I think, of about 4 teams. Utah are involved, Memphis, Phoenix, and there's another one somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's basically whoever is the best team out of those, you'll get that pick. So it'll probably be mid-20s, I would guess. One of those teams will probably pop.
Yeah. I guess the simplest way to think of it, or just a very reductive way to see like what the outcome might be, is that the best team out of these 4 right now are the Grizzlies, who are always a strong regular season team. They're going to be in the mid-20s, and they're going to have a shot at swapping their pick in this. So there's I would assume that that's where they end up. Like that pick ends up in the mid-20s. It feels like this is something that, because this was one of the this was one of the last trades to get announced. But I overall, like, I like that they got that selection over what I assumed would be the 25 first. I mean, what are your thoughts on getting that specific selection for an extra year of Nurkic?
I think it makes sense. I think it made a lot more sense when you made the Mark Williams trade. Because remember, when they made this deal, they thought Mark Williams wasn't going to be in Charlotte. And Nurkic was going to be their starting center, and his backup was going to be Musa Diabate, who they recently converted, who's had a really nice underrated breakout season. One of the kind of underrated, most improved fringe player rosters in the league this year. The concern always for me was you're going to be stuck with Nurkic for 2 years. That is negative value money. He is a backup at this point. And you're basically playing a first-round pick for that. And also by adding Nurkic, it took away their route to cap space, because both Martin and Micic, who they traded, had team options or non-guarantees for next season. So you're basically taking Nurkic's guaranteed $19 million for next season. And the cost of that is you get a first-round pick, which, I think it's a good for the situation the Charlotte Hornets are in. It's the right type of move that they should be making. And there is even maybe a world where Nurkic can come in, rehab his value a little bit, playing in Charlotte, and maybe they can flip him or use that kind of mid-size salary in another move this offseason, and they can kind of keep flipping this trade into more assets down the line. So I like that aspect of it. I mean, Micic was probably going to go back to Europe at the end of this year. Cody Martin was a useful player, but he's got struggling with a sport hernia, and he's struggled to stay healthy this year. So overall, it was a really solid move. It's the type of move this team should be making. My only concern was, like, what is Nurkic's attitude now going to be that he's coming off the bench? Because that was the whole thing. He wanted to have somewhere he could play. The good news so far is he seems to be really bought in. He seems to be enjoying this new situation. You can see that he's finding the joy for basketball again, and he's getting along with people, and he's already got compliments about his leadership style. So the fact that he seems to be embracing that, because having people moaning, unhappy with their role in the team, that's just exhausting, right? We've just seen it with Nurkic in Phoenix, and we know he can do a pretty good sulking NBA cameo role. But it doesn't look like we're going to get that in Charlotte. His effectiveness on the court, I mean, that's not really going to matter, but he'll be a fine body, and this team needs reliable NBA players who know what to do. So to get a first-round pick, I think they're now up to probably third or fourth in the league and total future first-round picks owed following this deal, and they can add it. I think it made a lot of sense.
So the biggest, I guess, cost of this trade is that they could have had like 20-ish million in cap space next summer.
Yes.
That's out the window right now. They're probably going to operate
Yeah.
over the cap, but that's fine because they have their full mid level. They could still use that as as a trade exception to take on more money. I think they're still going to be like well below. They're going to still be well below the luxury tax, so they can continue making these trades where they're taking on unwanted salaries, getting some second round picks. I think they've gotten like 8 second round picks since the offseason. And now this is the first round pick they've gotten from another team since last trade deadline when they got for PJ Washington and Terry Rozier. So they still have the flexibility to keep doing these things. They could still they'll still be able to not only use like straight up acquire a player with their mid-level exception, but they can just it's easily increase their salary. Like they can trade Nurkic for someone making like over $8 million more. Like that, there's other ways for them to easily run up the payroll and help other teams. And the Hornets have been the most proactive team, in my opinion, since the offseason, where you've had teams like the Pistons, Sixers, who kind of trying to get a little better, but then you've got a lot of other rebuilding teams, and they didn't really use their space as much to take on unwanted money because no one was really getting first round picks like premium value, and the Hornets just took what they could, which was mostly second round picks. But I think they read the market correctly and took what they could and used the opportunity. But another deal I like.
Remember, there was I was going to mention just there's the really interesting New York Knicks trade, right, where they traded the 3 signing traded players: Daquan Jeffries, Charlie Brown, Dwayne Washington to Charlotte. They've shown to be really creative in those ways of leveraging their limited space. I mean, I think in the off season, through the players and different roster transactions they made, I think they skirted below just to make just enough room by like a matter of a few thousand to be able to fit in the Devontae Graham, Reggie Jackson, waive those for picks. So they've really maximized like around the margins. Now it's easy to do that in some ways. What you then do with those second round picks and the value, that's the next thing, right? But you can now see like any player in the second round over the next 5 years, they probably have ammunition to trade up and get. So now they don't have to wait for players to go to them. They can be aggressive and target the people that they want. And now they have that position, but they've got to nail these draft picks. And that's always the harder thing. That it always looks easier when you've got this chest of picks.
Yeah, it looks, and now we're starting to see teams who have this huge surplus of picks starting to do something with them. Most notably when the Jazz traded 3 firsts that they didn't perceive are going to be very good for 1 that they think are going to be pretty good. And I think the Hornets are starting to touch into that whole space of draft pick evaluation where they did this trade in the middle of the night with the Thunder where they swapped a Suns second round pick for 1 Nuggets second round pick. And so it seems like they're gonna get as many as they can, but once they do, they're going to be more efficient with them and try to target selections that they view can be valuable in the future. So it's just these small signs. Like I'm really encouraged by the front office, what they've done. And again, like just the fact that they're willing to stomach rebuilding again, even though they were already kind of in the lottery. I gotta say, like I'd feel pretty good about the Hornets for the first time in probably ever since they expanded back into the league.
Well, they have a direction. Yeah. The Mitch Kupchak's front office was known for being pretty passive. Would very much like to sit there, see how his team did. Look, the team have been destroyed by injuries for the last 3 seasons. They had the 2 playing years, and since then they've just had injuries destroy season after season. I agree those teams probably weren't going anywhere. I do think they would have been probably playing level if they'd had even average NBA health, but there's been such significant time missed with key players, LaMelo Ball, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, for reasons not injury. But this front office is definitely more proactive and has leaned into kind of a rebuild more so than the Mitch Kupchak era, which just kind of felt like it just was very slowly muddling along, basically. And I think this front office has a much stronger ambition and direction and is willing to take more risks. Like we saw that in the Mark Williams trade. Mitch Kupchak was never making that type of deal. He is a much more old school GM. I think Jeff Peterson, who's taken this over, is definitely more of the kind of like Daryl Morey, Sam Presti, like let's maximize everything around the edges type school.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like there's actually a vision now. They actually have an idea of what they want to do, the types of players they want to go for. And especially when they decided like it's not an easy thing for a team to draft a player as talented as Mark Williams and despite the injuries just decide, hey, you know what, we got something else in mind. Takes a very strong front office to come to these decisions, and just I feel like they're in a good path. They clearly have a vision in mind. I'm not sure. Obviously, it'll take some time to see what it is, but the other thing I like about this trade is just the fact that I would imagine that the reason it went down to the wire was because I would guess the Suns were trying to trade one of those odd numbered first round picks that they got from the Jazz, which would be the lesser of Utah, Minnesota, Cleveland this year, 27 and 29. And I think the Hornets did a great job pushing for a different selection, in which case the 26, again, probably not going to be like the Suns pick necessarily, and it's probably not going to be a high pick anyways, but you get a little more variability where this year, that selection is going to be the 30th, but even if it's like 5 selections higher next year, I think that's a win. And you never know. You never know what'll happen. What if all those teams have down years? Then you're maybe looking at something in the late teens. So just a really good job in that aspect. I would imagine the Suns did not want to give up that selection. So that's about it with their trade deadline. We even managed to just touch on that second round pick swap with the Thunder. But yeah, like I said, overall, I just think they've done a great job. Even as Mitch Kupchak was exiting last summer, I agree with those things you were saying. He was for the most part, a lot kind of passive towards the end. But like exiting, getting a first round pick for PJ, getting a first round pick for Rozier, getting 2 second round picks and Trey Manford, Gordon Hayward, just like a great exit, great way to leave things off for the next front office. They have a nice surplus of first round picks now. Second round picks, they didn't really have much of a surplus now. But I
just on that Mitch Kupchak trade deadline.
Last year's trade deadline.
Yeah, a lot of reporting out of that is Mitch Kupchak was not the one driving that. Okay.
Okay.
New ownership was already in place at that point. Jeff Peterson had not been hired, but Rick Schnell and Jeff Peterson go back a long way, and it would not surprise. There was a lot of noise, basically, that the new ownership group was driving that, and Mitch Kupchak was the one who was, signing his name on it and doing the media because he was still in post. But it was not his vision to do that. It was something the new ownership were pushing. So I think, yes, we should give credit for execution, but maybe not for vision. Or at least like we weren't in the room, but I don't think this was all Mitch Kupchak's idea.
Dang. As a former Laker fan, especially during those Kobe years, I loved Mitch Kupchak. It's a little disappointing to hear, but it's okay. But it also checks out that because these moves are more aligned with what they've been doing this season, so that makes sense. But like we said in the very beginning, it seems like just the fact that Mark Williams got traded, it's hard to tell exactly who the front office is attached to. And the one name that really got into my mind as I wonder what they're thinking about, like how they feel about this guy. It's LaMelo Ball. And I bring that up mainly because they didn't draft him, but he's been really good for them. But it's going to be a while until they're good. And I'm sure they're aware of that. What are your thoughts about him? Do you think there's a good chance he's going to be a part of the next great Hornets team?
Well, I had this question on my podcast just the other week. As what are the odds that LaMelo Ball is on the Hornets in the last year of his current contract? And I put that as below 20%. So I don't know when everyone thinks the next great Hornets team will be. If you think it's further away than 5 years, then I would say probably not. Um, I think there's a path. LaMelo Ball for me is a number two. Right, he is not the primary guy. He's just not good enough creating for himself in the half court or for others in the half court consistently enough. He would play incredibly off a number one option where he can, like if you look at all the shooting numbers, he's incredible when he's open. All right, has open shots. When he has to take contested ones because of his mechanics, just the way he scores, that's not what he's so good at. And right now on the Hornets, he's number one on the scouting report every single night. So if they can find a number one, and the way they're probably going to do that is only through the draft. Let's just be honest. And it's if they get Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, one of these guys pops, AJ Diabanza next year or whatever it is. If they can get a number one, then I think LaMelo Ball could be. But if they're not able to find a number one, then he's their only way to get there, right? By flipping him in a trade to get more picks, to get players. I thought the De'Aaron Fox trade was really interesting recently because I think that's probably a similar return of value as I think LaMelo Ball would bring. Obviously, LaMelo was younger on a longer contract, more injury prone. De'Aaron Fox is probably a little bit more accomplished, but you're talking about like a borderline all-star guard, basically. And like I kind of asked Hornets fans, if you got the De'Aaron Fox trade, would you do that? And a lot of people pushback was no. And I understand that. I think because of his injury history, you feel like you're selling LaMelo Ball now, he would go elsewhere. What if he stayed healthy and all of a sudden he would be worth so much more after a fully healthy season? And that could be a big if, but you could risk looking very stupid. And that's not also rule out the commercial success that comes with LaMelo Ball. He just led the league in all-star voting for guards in the Eastern Conference. He has more Instagram followers than most teams. He is one of the best-selling jerseys, despite being stuck in a NBA wasteland in Charlotte and having no success in the playoffs. He is one of the few things probably bringing in crowds and commercial income to the Charlotte Hornets organization. So, will he be a part of the next team? I don't know. I will say, like, the team are undoubtedly better when he's out there. And there is this weird narrative around the NBA that LaMelo Ball is a losing player. And I've written about this, that like if you check all stats and you compare him to other, losing players like Devin Booker and things of the past, these are guys who are just in bad situations and have been. I think this year the Hornets are 1-22 when LaMelo Ball doesn't play or finish the game. And that means I think they've got about 15, 16, 17, 14 wins at the minute. That means they're like 13 and 20 or something when he does play, which is like not good, but it's competitive. And that's my biggest issue here is no one's out here arguing LaMelo Ball is a number one option on a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. That's not what Hornets fans, I think, get frustrated about. But the narrative thrown out is like he is out here playing in the big three. And he is just putting up shots and not trying to win and doesn't care about it. And that is just completely off. And there just isn't enough coverage or people watching the Hornets, like you said, and for good reason, right? When you've got 30 teams to watch, like, why would you waste your time watching the Wizards, the Pelicans, and the Hornets? They're not going to be relevant. You're not going to be speaking about them on radio, on TV. They're not going to generate clicks for your website. So I understand it. It's a business decision for the media. But it also leads to a bunch of inaccuracies. So he is not a perfect player by any means. I've been pretty harsh on him, especially some of his decision-making. But I think there is a role for him in Charlotte if they can get someone that he can play off. That was a very long answer to a very short question.
As far as the De'Aaron Fox trade analogy you brought up, I think obviously the earlier the Hornets act, the much better return they'll get. I wasn't a fan of the Kings' return, but a lot of that had to do just with Fox having only 1 year left on his deal, and the Spurs credibly had the threat of signing him outright with cap space in the 2026 summer. I would imagine that the Hornets are definitely like listening, not necessarily actively shopping around LaMelo, but if a team, makes an offer, they're probably writing it down in their book and if circling back. And if I had to guess, if a team made a really big haul involving a majority of their first future unprotected first round picks, some quality young players that the Hornets like, I think they'd strongly consider it at this point. And what could really push that is if they they are going to get a top selection in this draft. I don't know if there's been enough attention to just how bad the Hornets have been this year, because they started the season okay, about 6-9, and I looked like, and now I'm just looking into it. They've only won 8 games since, I think, including the Lakers one that they just got, and I think only the Wizards have done worse than that. So I'm looking at the Hornets.
Can I add some context to that?
Sure.
Just some reasoning and context to that. So after that start, they lost Trey Mann, who was a 6th man candidate of the year, who's had a back injury since. They lost Grant Williams, who's their most effective big, who tore his ACL. So you lost 2 of your top 7 players for the season after that start. On top of that, you lost Brandon Miller halfway through to a wrist injury for the season. I know we're going to come on to that. You lost LaMelo Ball for another ankle sprain, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams missed a bunch of time to start the year. Their starting 5, which they envisioned starting the season, which was LaMelo, Josh Green, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams, have started and finished, I think, 3 games this season. And the top of the starting 5 missing players, like I said, Trey Mann and Grant Williams, their 2 key reserves, have also been missing. So this Hornets team, after that start, have essentially just been too hurt. That they were not talented enough to be a competitive team already, really. They were going to be a borderline playoff team if everything went well. You take out 3 or 4 of your top 7 or 8 players, and then that's why they're going to drop off, right? So it's not that they just played badly, which a lot of people will look at as they started well and started playing badly. There's a lot of noise around that, which has led to that.
Right. But no, I was only getting to just that over the past 3 months, they've had one of the worst records, just to get to the idea that, as I look ahead, if you look at their cap sheets on capsheets.com, I'm projecting them with the number 2 pick. And especially now with all these injuries and their trajectory, seems like that's where they're heading, the number 2 worst record. So back to the LaMelo thing, the thing that could really propel something would be if they actually get a top 2, 3, 4 selection, which I think they're in prime position to now. And when you look at the cluster of them, they have a 3-way tie with the Pelicans and Jazz. I feel like just going forward, given how injured the Hornets are, it feels like they're gonna be number 2 in that area. And once that happens, I just get the idea. I know we're going to see speculation out there. This was something I touched with on the Pelicans with Will Guillory last week, that we're talking about Zion and, what would it take for them to potentially move on from him, which I doubt that's going to happen at this point. But if they were to get the number 1 pick, people are going to talk about it. People are going to talk about, oh, here you go. You got the next franchise guy. Now, is that something they might consider? And I think with the Hornets, it'll probably be the same thing. Where if they I guess no matter, they're in a position where they should get the best player available regardless of position. But let's say they are in a position to draft Dylan Harper, who's another big point guard. Then, that could really not only burst the speculation, but then maybe even lead the Hornets to doing that type of thing already. So that's definitely what I'm keeping an eye on. And yeah, so that's LaMelo. The other player, just to follow up on that, UFC, I think for them to do that before the draft, I would be pretty shocked, even if the Dylan Harper was the selection, for a couple of reasons. One, and I think the Pelicans have the same issue with Zion here. Right, like you said earlier, if a team came and gave a big offer, I think the Hornets would entertain it. I don't think any team is doing that for LaMelo or for Zion, because they've not been able to stay on the court. And what team is giving a big offer for a player who cannot stay healthy? So I don't think that's going to happen. And that's, I agree. When people see that Mark Williams trade being made, people go, oh, they're trading anyone, right? Oh, let's call LaMelo Ball. But I also think if you do draft a Dylan Harper,
you use LaMelo Ball to insulate Dylan Harper, right? You know, he's still the guy who handles the ball at the start. You hope Dylan Harper gets up to speed. You wait till you see him in your program. You figure out, oh yeah, he's the real deal. Then you can move Dylan Harper LaMelo Ball at a later point. I don't think it happens on draft night or before the draft. I think that would be bold. But this team have, I guess, shown that they could be bold. So maybe I'm speaking out both sides of my mouth a little bit. But I would be surprised. I think LaMelo will be on the roster until next year, and then I think it will depend how things break.
I agree that it's not going to be that simple for them to just get the exact thing they would want for them to consider moving off him. Aside from the injuries, when you look around, seems like most teams are pretty taken care of at guard for the most part, at having a lead guard. Like when you look around, there's not too many teams. So a lot of teams, they already have a guy and it might be young enough, but maybe, so for them, it's like, do you want to upgrade from that guy? You can think about which teams they are.
Orlando are the one, yeah, right, who don't have clearly that guy. And I know Fernie Simons has been linked to there in the past, and Orlando are the one, but then you look at their defensive identity and go, well, Melo doesn't really fit into that. And is it one of those where you want everyone on the same page, or do they have enough defensive talent that they feel they can cover up LaMelo Ball? But that's the kind of like clear and obvious one in terms of like, hey, we are putting two hands up. We need a point guard. Like, we have to find a point guard.
Yeah. So just the point guard market in general, I think I was a lot more down on him before the season, about like the way you kind of alluded to how some people around the league view him. I'm much higher on him now. I think there's a very good chance that as long as he stays healthy, that contract's going to look pretty favorable. He's in the beginning of it. And I would just, so yeah, I mean, it's just about, I guess, who just needs, like, who necessarily wants to make that type of upgrade and is willing to give up whatever it takes. I don't think it's so much more like, do we think LaMelo is a winning player, whatever that narrative is. I just think it's more like, can we meet the Hornets price? And I don't know. That's the biggest question mark, I would say. The only other player then, though, that that you would think is available, there's Miles Bridges, who they re-signed him to this contract, 3 years, 75, descending scale. I'm imagining they signed it largely so they can trade him later. He didn't get moved. I'm wondering if some of it might have to do with teams maybe not still wanting to touch him. Do you think there's still that going on, or do you think also at the same time he hasn't been playing up to his usual standard as of late, though? This past few weeks he's been getting a lot closer to that. Do you think there's just still that element going on, or are teams just maybe thinking he's just not that like impactful that they need to go out and get him?
Miles Bridges is a pretty kind of maddening player because he's been inconsistent throughout his career. He's looked incredible for months and then looked disappointing. I mean, he started the season, and if you were to make a worst contract list in the NBA after 25 games a season, Miles Bridges was on the list. He was playing terribly, really struggling as a third, fourth option next to LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller. The weird thing for Miles is he is more comfortable as an offensive player when he's able to have the ball in his hands and play as a decision maker. But then he's just not good enough to do that for a talented team. So he's caught in this little bit no man's land. If there's a player out there who you want to say is maybe a kind of like good stats, bad team player, I think Miles Bridges is that player, really, because he is someone, he's put up stats when people are out injured and he's been able to take a bunch of shots. I will say, like, he's had some of his better games of his career in the last couple of weeks, like you said, but he's just never been able to replicate that form when everybody else is healthy and available, when he's had to fit into that lower rung option. Is that something he can develop at this point? I kind of think he is what he is now, and his athleticism is declining, and that was a big part of what made him so exhilarating and exciting to watch, and it helped him driving to the rim. That is definitely already going away. So I think he is definitely a trade candidate. I think, like you said, they signed him to that declining contract for that exact reason. There will be some teams who probably don't want to touch him just because of the off-court stuff, and I completely understand that. But we also know that there are teams that would. The LA Clippers have been rumored to be interested. The Phoenix Suns have been rumored to be interested. Detroit Pistons. All three teams who've shown trade interest in Miles Bridges in the last 12 months. So I think if they can find the right deal, again, how will this draft go? If they draft a Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey, that makes Miles Bridges more extendable. I think the Grant Williams injury actually maybe really hurt his trade market for the Charlotte Hornets because all of a sudden he was, worth a lot more to them than when Grant Williams was healthy. But he's a pretty infuriating player. He can look great one night, but the defense is not where you want it to be. He's kind of like a 6'6" ground-bound power forward, even though in transition he can get up for dunks, but it's not that functional really in the half court anymore. It's definitely taken that decline. So I think Miles Bridges is absolutely a trade target. I think his value might be a little bit higher around the league than it is among fans because I just think the off-court stuff colors people's opinions so much, and maybe guys around the league view it a little bit more black and white. But we'll find out, I think, in the next 18 months.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head of just about how he's performed this season, though. So you talk about the athleticism declining, or it should eventually. He's about to turn 27, so I'm sure that's on some teams' minds. He still fills out the stat sheet, and even when you look at what he's done these past few weeks, yeah, the shooting's been pretty poor. Even for he's never been an outstanding shooter, but it's been a lot worse than usual. Not like an outstanding defender by any means. And yeah, the contract's fine. So it feels like most teams probably don't see him as a needle mover at the moment. And so maybe the Hornets just got to wait a little longer. I would guess that they would have, if they got the right return offer to them, they would have moved on from him from now. And I was just a little surprised they didn't get that already. So now maybe it's going to have to take a little longer. Yeah,
I think his value goes up the longer he gets into this contract because it's declining, right?
Right.
And as other contracts get signed around the league, and you see already buyer's remorse with maybe OG Anunoby making $40 million per year, Paul George, right? I think at some point one of these teams can go, for a 40% discount, we can get Miles Bridges. He's not as good, but not for those players specifically, but in years next offseason or even the offseason after, his contract's going to look better and better at that point. But you're right. He is quite statistically a unique player. If you look at, there is no other player in the NBA, I looked this up the other day, with his combination of usage, defensive rebounding, assist rate, and turnover rate being low. There is no other player in the NBA matching what Miles Bridges does. So he really is a kind of high usage, high rebounder, creates for others. He's quite a unique player, but that can also make him really difficult to fit around players. And I think that's what we found in Charlotte.
Yeah. That's interesting. You mentioned the fact that he can be having some positive value as relief for a team. I can't imagine. I don't know what it would take for let you say Paul George hypothetically. I'm sure that's something the the Sixers would probably want to consider at this point, but I don't know what it would take for the Hornets to they'd probably need a good amount of stuff to do that. So let's get to the last thing. Just look ahead a little more into the offseason. Biggest thing is the draft. We touched on that. I feel like they'll probably have the second best odds. Do you have an idea of what your ideal Hornets offseason is? You can explain any way you want, if you have any specific guys in the draft, any specific goals as far as deals with the current players or targets. Do you have anything in mind as far as what you would like to see?
Yeah, I think it'll be a quieter offseason this year than the last. Look, it's easy to sit here and say Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg would be perfect for this team. But outside of Cooper Flagg, I think the guy who probably pops. I think firstly, all the top players. Ace Bailey, I can see the role here. Little funky next to Brandon Miller, But I know I've heard people saying they want Ace Bailey to go to like a team with a better infrastructure where he can like learn the game a little better. And I subscribe to that theory too. But this team needs shooting and scoring, and that is something Ace Bailey can do, and he brings rim protection. Dylan Harper, I think he could play with LaMelo Ball early in his career, and he gives you flexibility in decision making, and he gives you downforce rim pressure, which is something this team really lacks. Even LaMelo Ball, he's a great passer. He's not a great guy at getting to the rim and finishing. Neither is Brandon Miller. Brandon and Miles Bridges can do it sometimes. Outside of those top three names, I think VJ Edgecombe is a really interesting name in the draft. If they were to fall to kind of like 5 or 6, he's probably the guy that I would have circled there. Carmen Maluak from Duke, the center, is another interesting guy, especially keeping in mind they might move off from Mark Williams this offseason. So there's a lot of interesting names in the draft. In the trade market, like you said earlier, I think they've got about 32 million between the salary cap and the luxury tax. So they are in position to make some trades where they can take on some more bad money. I think everything I've read and reading into what I've heard about this front office, they are viewing kind of this year and next year as rebuilding years again. And they have a long runway on this. They've talked about that. They have a new practice facility opening in late 2026. And I think really that's what they're aiming. They want to have the new shiny practice facility, this new training center, and they want to kind of make that statement that season, 2026-27, that is the season that we're going to really start pushing forward. They will have that mid-level exception, 14 million or so. If they don't use it to accept someone in the trade, I actually think this could be a little bit like someone, they need some backcourt depth after trading Micic, especially if Draymond goes. I think Chris Paul could actually be a really interesting player for them to look at. A mentor for LaMelo Ball, a de facto assistant coach for a young team which needs guidance, has ties to North Carolina from playing at Wake Forest in his college years. So he's like a guy that, let's bring in a veteran who can play and have a role. I think that would be a guy. Now, would Chris Paul want to come to Charlotte? Probably not. Okay, he could go back to San Antonio or go to a contender, but I think he's an interesting veteran addition to kind of replace the Taj Gibson, Seth Curry role, but he can actually play for you and really maybe help LaMelo Ball develop, and that could be a big part of his impact. But other than that, it will be looking at to maximize the draft, probably collect more assets. If they could get off a little bit of long-term money, that would be good, because for a bad team, they're a little bit clustered at the moment with the Josh Green, Nurkic, Grant Williams, kind of, there's no real view to cap space anytime soon. But to free up money moving those guys is probably going to cost them assets at this point. So it might be a little bit early for that.
Yeah, I like where you went with the point guard thing. So, yeah, first I just think take the best player available, no matter who it is, no matter what position. I'm sure you can, just about all these guys at the top, I'm sure you could fit him in with LaMelo, with Brandon Miller. If possible, see if they can turn Miles Bridges into maybe a late first in this draft, try to get another bite at the apple in this draft. I think that would make sense if they can get another selection. Do they have a second round pick in this draft? Do they?
They don't. They won't have their own, but they have Phillies and New Orleans. Orleans. So they've got a very high second from the Pelicans trade.
So maybe they can package some of those, trade up. Yeah, I see 32 and 34 projected. Maybe they could package them up, try to get into the mid 20s. We didn't. You touched a little bit on Grant Williams, Josh Green. Hopefully they can get some positive value for them, but otherwise those are great guys to have on their contract. I know a lot of people are lower on Josh Green this year. I still like that deal. I think he's going to do a lot better than this. And yeah, as far as the MLE, so one thing that came to mind when you mentioned Chris Paul. So first, I'm sure they'll use a portion to take on some unwanted money, but maybe they could do that they can get a point guard and help another team needing to save money. When you said Chris Paul, Mike Conley came to mind, and the Wolves are a team that they've already did that big Karl Anthony Towns trade, saved a lot of money. I feel like they still going to want to reduce a little more payroll. maybe they want to trade Mike Conley. The Hornets, why don't you bring him in? If you're, especially if you're getting like a second round pick or something on top of that. So maybe there's that type of deal out there where they do get the veteran guard and also get an additional asset on top of it. And yeah, Conley would serve that role great. And then the other thing
I like
is,
that. I like that suggestion. That's a good
yeah.
idea.
And then the other thing is, I would imagine they'll bring back Trey Mann. So he hasn't played in months now. It's a back injury, right?
It's herniated disc.
So before the season started, I was thinking he might be looking at something like below the mid-level, maybe 8 to 9 million a year. I'm trying to think of, there's some players I got like a, similar tiers. I'm getting similar type of deal as him in the offseason. I guess now just a lot of it depends on if he comes back this year, how he looks. But I would imagine that they'll bring him back. They've got his restricted rights. Even if they run up their payroll a lot with the mid-level, doing some trades where they increase payroll, they should have plenty of room to factor him in, unless maybe a team wants him in a sign and trade, willing to give up something that interests the Hornets. But otherwise, I would guess they bring him back. They could really, like, looking at this roster, they could really use what he's got off the bench.
Oh, great. He was after training camp and preseason. If you were to say to the coaching staff and the players who's like the MVP from expectation of training camp, it would have been Trey Mann. He started the year, I think he averaged 16, 4 and 4, coming off the bench, and he took a real jump. Defensively, he was positive. He was creating for others. He was shooting. He was, the story of preseason and early season for the Hornets. And then this back injury just hit him out of nowhere, right? So I think he will be back on the team unless they have concern that this back injury is, not something that can be resolved. But the only potential positive of this whole thing is I think he was probably, I guess my expectation was if he'd had a season playing how he was doing, he might have been in that 12 to 16 million range, whereas now I think he will probably be down in the 8-figure range, under 10 million, because no one's queuing up to sign a 6'3" combo guard with back issues who's quite unproven in the league. But I think the Hornets saw a lot behind the scenes in the summer. He was one of the hardest workers on the team, was kind of a bit of a leader for this team as well. So they really like him, and I think they want to see him have that role. And he was playing even with LaMelo Ball a little bit to close games early in the year, and that was working too.
Yeah, when you say 12 to 16, I could see him like being that level of player in terms of like what he deserves. When I do my free agent previews as we get closer, I'm probably going to be throwing figures that people will be like, oh, you think he's worth that much? And I just think the market's going to be pretty rough again for role players. So, I wouldn't, he might get something like an annual range that you might feel like, oh, he's clearly better than this based on what he does, but you never know. Like, just like very few teams wanted to like invest in role players. Many teams didn't use for mid-level exceptions. So, hopefully he gets back on the court and he's able to push for something bigger than that. But listen, that's about all I've got. James, thanks for being on. Where do you have any things we should be looking forward to that you've got writing wise or podcast wise?
Yeah, I've just had a couple of big features and Mark Williams that have come out for Charlotte Culture. I also did some mid-season grades for Charlotte Hornets, the players, even the coaching staff, and the front office. So if you want a kind of a stopgap on where is everything at with the Charlotte Hornets, you can go on charlotteculture.com and go on sports. You can find my mid-season grades article on there. There's a lot of good little kind of stats nuggets as well that you might probably not realize about the Hornets team. And then on the podcast side, you can find us on the SI Hornets podcast. You'll find us on there. We have 3 shows a week on our podcast feed covering the Charlotte Hornets. I have a show with Sam Dracula, who's a kind of Hornets YouTuber, content creator, and we'll have shows every week. And we've got we've got what we call a 15 and 60 coming up, where we're going to be covering all 15 players in 60 minutes and giving you the latest info there. And we're going to be having a little look at some of the new players. The Hornets have added Wendell Moore Jr., Alfred Payton, Damian Barr to a two-way contract who's played really well recently, and looking at how they're using Yusuf Nurkic too. So, yeah, we're getting some pretty hardcore stuff. But if you're interested in the Hornets and you're listening to this already, I think you'll like it.
All right, sounds good, James. So this will also be in audio form, so whoever will listen to this later through Spotify, Apple, you can follow James on Twitter, British_Buzz. Blue Sky is just British Buzz. There's no underscore on Blue Sky, right?
I'm not sure. I've not checked my Blue Sky.
I think I saw that there wasn't. But either way, British Buzz on both, and you can find his work on CLTure. It's spelled CLTure, and SI Hornets. James, thanks for coming on. I'd love to have you on again whenever I talk Hornets. And yeah, if you're listening to this, you can follow me on YouTube. It's my name, Yossi Goslin. Follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky Yossi Goslin. And please subscribe to Third Apron, my salary cap newsletter. I'm going to have a lot more stuff as we get closer to the offseason. That's about it. Thanks, everybody.
Yossi, thanks for having me on so much. I appreciate it.